Welcome into the Georgia Vote bonus streaming political roundtable. If you saw us on Sunday morning, this is the extra innings of a great conversation we have every Sunday morning. I'm Zach Merchant, joined as always by Faith Jesse, and joined this week by Democratic strategist Fred Hicks, Republican strategist Mark Roundtree, and AJC politics reporter Riley Bunch, all returning members of the panel. We are glad to have you here as always. And let's continue this conversation and start with you again, Riley. A big Supreme Court ruling this week that opens the door to redistricting across the country. There's a lot of conversation happening about it here in Georgia as well. A lot of the focus has been on, well, what could happen to the federal congressional district maps here in Georgia? But that ruling goes beyond that. There's calls to redraw state house, state senate districts, and elsewhere. How much of an impact is this going to have on the map here, potentially?
I think it could have a big impact. I mean, it would solidify Republicans' hold on the state house, right? Even when we have some of our statewide offices that might be up for grabs in this swing state. And I think that there's just a increased focus on local politics right now with just the stalemates in D.C. That's going to bring some attention to a redistricting process if we have one.
And Fred, you immediately, as we were chatting off air, you pointed at the down ballot, sort of down, I don't want to call it down district, but the county commission level impact here. What are Democrats thinking about this?
So this is a very impactful decision, more than what most people have been thinking about. So by allowing this to happen, you're now going to impact, like you just mentioned, the county commission level. And so if you redraw those lines, particularly like in Fulton County, which is drawn the ire of Republicans, and Cobb County, which Republicans used to have, if you can change the county commission seats, add a Republican or two there, then that's going to change who you appoint to the Board of Elections, and that will allow you to impact and influence how votes are counted, when votes take place, and whether or not votes are certified. A very, very big point, especially for people who believe that the election in 2020 was stolen. So this is a major, major, major decision that will have ramifications up and down the line, but especially at the county level.
Mark?
What this really reopens up at a legislative and local level is Metro Atlanta to a great degree. Yep. I think you're going to get a number of Republicans have been pretty much, I think, wiped out in most of Metro Atlanta at this point. If you look at DeKalb County, not one Republican elected. There's no Republicans elected south of the river in Fulton County. You can look at Clayton. I mean, you can go through. I think all of this changes now, and I think you're going to have that. I do think one other thing, on a congressional level, I think Sanford Bishop, his district is gone. I think that is one of the first ones to go. He also is nearing retirement, probably. The other, David Scott's district is such an abomination of the way it was drawn. I think that is going to be gone as well.
And you were in my head because I was actually going to ask you that exact question that you answered. I want to change gears here and talk about the numbers that we spoke about on the show, the new AJC poll on the Republican governor's race. Here's a question. Rick Jackson is somebody, unless you worked for him, you probably didn't know who he was until February because he had a lot of money. I think the most expensive Republican primary Greg Bluestein was reporting ever. Is this voters' sentiment or is this messaging saturation? What's coming here? Why are we seeing the numbers of Rick Jackson now at 27%, according to AJC?
Well, he's stayed negative in the campaign for, basically 2 straight months. And I think at some point it's boomeranging. I think they have overdone it, and they haven't come up with a lot of new, fresh messaging. And I think if you started this campaign, if you asked me, or anybody, if you asked on February 28th, March 1st, you said, what do you know about Rick Jackson? And you would have a little bit of the messaging about being a foster child, having a tough time, and becoming successful. Today, I don't think that would be the number one thing people would say. I think they would say, that's the rich guy running. And that doesn't help. And I think his unfavorable rating has gone up a lot. I think his poll numbers have come down.
So, Fred, who goes to the runoff here and potentially into November?
I think right now you still have to think it's Rick Jackson and Burt Jones in the runoff. But do not sleep on Brad Raffensperger. If I'm him, if I'm his campaign team, I go all in. He's been talking about Brian Kemp more. We talked about on the show before. He's talking about that more. Ride the Kemp wave and try to get in there. Get these undecideds to break your way and slide into the runoff. And at that point, it's a fair game because he is the toughest opponent for Democrats in November, Brad Raffensperger, not Rick Jackson.
Because, Riley, the undecideds could really have some weight here.
Yeah, there has to be a shift in messaging from the candidates because it is true. I agree with what Mark is saying, that the attacks against each other are really kind of pulling their own individual campaigns down. It would be great to hear some of their policy stances and also kind of pull conversation away from President Trump, right? They're also kind of jockeying for who is the best Trump-aligned candidate. And I think in the weeks leading up to the primary, there has to be some shifts.
And Trump has already endorsed Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones.
And you tee up a question I wanted to ask about President Trump as well in the Senate race, because President Trump has endorsed in the governor's race here, but he has not endorsed in the Republican Senate primary. Let's start with you, Riley. And your perspective is so unique, too, because you've covered city politics here in Atlanta, and now you cover state politics. You've talked to voters all across your career. How important, when you talk to them, do they say a Trump endorsement would be as they decide who to vote for? And I should point out, too, a Senate primary that, according to the AJC poll, has 54% of likely voters undecided.
Well, let's look at the approval ratings for Trump in that poll, right? We have more than 60% of primary voters, Republican primary voters, are in favor, strongly approve of what he's doing in the White House. And we have more than 70% who strongly think that the nation is on the right track. And I think that would have a big impact if he came out and endorsed a candidate in this race on those undecided voters.
Why, Mark, has the president not endorsed in that Senate contest?
Well, if in the House, if you have such a thin majority, I think it's a strategic decision just not to engage with two guys that have pretty much backed him at every level. And
you're talking
oddly,
about Carter and Collins.
Carter
there.
and Collins, yes, I'm sorry about that. Yes, Congressman Carter, Congressman Collins. And there has been such a play by the Derek Dooley supporters to also get at least a freezing out. I don't think anybody expected Donald Trump to endorse Dooley because he was a product sort of the Kemp machine in Georgia. But I do think that, that their goal was to freeze out, and maybe in some ways that was the win.
And we're speaking of endorsements, and I want you to weigh on this, and this question is directed to you, so if you'd like to respond to Mark. We saw former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms get a pretty big endorsement from President Joe Biden this week. How does that play?
So just real quick on the point that Mark is making there, I think there was, and I've said it before, I've always thought there was a backroom deal. So the governor was given his candidate in the Senate race, and the president was given his candidate in the governor's race, and neither of those opposed or backed the person in the other one. I don't think that's coincidental, and I think we should be really honest about that, and that they both got what they wanted, probably as a favorite for the governor supporting the president in 2024 when the president was struggling in Georgia. That being said, speaking of the president in 2024, Joe Biden, while this endorsement should have been expected, I think this is tremendous for Mayor Bottoms. As she has hovered somewhere between 38 and 42, 45% in the polls, getting the president to weigh in could be exactly what she needs to get over the hump, to get over that 50% hump, which has got to be the objective, because remember, once we have a nominee, we can then access that leadership committee money, which will help close the gap between Democrats and Republicans. So it's important to try to win this now.
And timing of that as well.
Absolutely. Right as voting has started, and as the other candidates really struggle to buy airtime, getting that kind of earned media, and then getting the president's support. Because again, the president is not President Biden. I mean, that is, if you're an undecided voter, you're trying to think about what do you want. That helps you, and it also draws a distinction between her and Jeff Duncan, reminding people that she's a Democrat and he is not.
And one question here too: as much as it could help her, could it hurt her? Because I
don't think so. Not in this primary. I mean, again, the goal is to try to get to that 50% right now, but on May 19th, and having his support is a big deal.
We've got only about 60 seconds left, but I want to switch gears a little bit. We're going to continue to talk about endorsements here. Governor Brian Kemp, of course, Mark, as you alluded to, he has strongly endorsed Derek Dooley in the U.S. Senate contest, but he has not endorsed in the race to replace him in the Republican governor's primary. Mark, I want to get your thoughts on that, on why this is the case, and then Riley, we'll go to you. Mark?
Well, I'm not sure that any of these candidates necessarily align completely with how Brian Kemp has governed as governor. So I think Raffensperger and he sort of ended up on the same side of not wanting to call a special session in the throes of the 2020 election, but I do think that that was about the extent of their alliance. I don't think he's really allied with any of these people publicly, and it sort of is, frankly, a little bit of an insult to Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones that he wasn't endorsed, considering their halls are in the same, their offices are in the same building.
Riley, in your reporting, what are you hearing about this?
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, Kemp has really staked his lane as more of that middle road in the state house that we have here, and it would be counter to some of the things that he has done in the past, particularly around the 2020 election, to back a Burt Jones, who was one of the electors in part of Donald Trump's scheme to overturn the 2020 election. So I'm not surprised that he hasn't weighed in here and is pouring his focus into the Senate race.
Well, always so much to talk about in Georgia politics, especially now that we are fewer than 3 weeks out from Election Day. And then, hey, we're going to have the runoffs after that, and then we're going to have the November general election. So get ready.
Some special elections in there
and
somewhere.
It's just going to keep going and going and going. And so is the Georgia vote. So are these kinds of conversations. Thank you to all of you, as always, for being on the panel. Thank you to all of you for watching. We will see you again next time for another edition of the Georgia Vote.